Hello Internet, this is Sophia. One philosophy that has been very helpful for me in my life has been an ancient philosophy known as Stoicism. Now no, I don't always follow it 100% to a T, but it has been very foundational in how I have coped with a number of things that life has thrown at me. Of course, as with any system that has foundational texts that are many centuries old, with Stoicism too, there's the danger of people falling into the trap of fundamentalism. Fundamentalism is when you take ancient texts and treat them as being literal and beyond question. And that is a really big mistake because we as a society have learned a lot about how the world works and how the human mind works that people did not know close to 2,000 years ago when the foundational Stoic texts were written. For example, ancient Stoic writers believed that while we don't always have total control over what happens in the world outside of us, we have complete control over what happens in our mind. Modern psychology, however, realizes that that's not always entirely true. Does this mean that Stoicism isn't useful? No, not at all, but it does mean that we might have to make some adjustments as to how we apply Stoicism. And this can even mean slightly adjusting what we are to expect that we can get out of Stoicism. For example, the ancient Stoic writers believed that if you master Stoicism, you can become completely immune to things such as anxiety, heartache, disappointment, and stuff like that. And it is true that Stoic practice can increase your resilience toward these things. However, if you expect to be completely immune and invulnerable to those things, you're living in a fantasy world. But then, slightly worse than fundamentalism, although something that I observe tends to often coincide with it, is something that I refer to as weaponized Stoicism, something that the video that I'll be responding to today is a prime example of. Weaponized Stoicism is when someone who identifies as a Stoic, instead of staying focused on what is the essential question of Stoicism, which is how they themselves can deal with their issues in their life, they instead go off on a tangent and start focusing on things like why other people shouldn't care about things that they don't want those other people to care about. This, not always, but often is followed by extremely self-righteous judgment about what people do to address the issues that aggrieve them. Quite unsurprisingly, when you see weaponized Stoicism, the groups that it is weaponized against very often are marginalized groups, such as LGBT people, religious minorities, and racial minorities. And to see a prime example of this complete up of Stoicism in action, you need look no further than a recent video by Bjorn Andreas Bull-Hansen in which he shows just how much of a he can be to the protesters who are demonstrating in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd.
Oh, I have been watching the news. I know I shouldn't, but because it just makes me upset.
What? Did I hear you right? Did you just say that the news makes you upset? Because that's definitely not what the ancient Stoic writers would say. I mean, if you've studied at all the works of Epictetus, for example, it's pretty clear that he would insist quite adamantly that it is not the news that makes you upset, but your opinion about the news that makes you upset. Of course, I am not a fundamentalist. I am a modern Stoic, so I know that what kinds of opinions the news will inspire on someone is shaped by many things, including their instincts, their experiences, and a lot of other stuff. Of course, that is not to say that there's nothing that you can do to affect a rewiring or reworking of this chain of causality between the news and your opinion about the news that causes your emotional reaction to it. However, being a modern Stoic, I understand that at times this process can be quite a drain, and there may at times be limits to just how far that can go. That said, if Bjorn Andreas Bull-Hansen is to take leniency for himself on that matter, he should also extend it to others. That is, if he can forgive himself of the fact that he is made upset by the news, he should be a bit sympathetic toward African Americans being somewhat torqued by the fact that they are very often at an unreasonable rate tailed by police, and far more likely than any other racial group to be beaten to death by the police. That said, what is it that he is seeing on the news that is so overwhelming that despite his best effort at Stoic practice, he is unable to prevent himself from getting upset?
Crazy times. People rioting in the streets. People tearing down statues. Nothing unique about it. You know what I think it is? I think it's a culture war. Now, it has reached the streets.
Okay, I understand. Matters of civil unrest are disconcerting to you. Maybe there is something about the destruction of statues, no matter who those are statues of, that you find to be a little bit triggering. As I said, totally understandable because none of us are perfect sages. We don't have complete control over our emotions, so no effort to blame you there. But if it's a bit much for you to watch statues being toppled halfway across the world, surely you can empathize with a group of people who are just sick and tired of having more than their fair share of police scrutiny, a lot of police harassment, and even police brutality. When they take to the streets and demand at long last that there be a end put to this, surely you can empathize. I mean, you can't watch the news without getting upset, so surely you can understand that these people aren't going to have an infinite threshold before they start taking to the streets and demanding justice.
This is the summer of hate. Not the summer of justice. Not the summer when the downtrodden finally stood up and demanded justice. No, it's not about that.
Unbelievable. That is exactly what this is about. Considering the title that you gave your video, you have heard the name George Floyd. Do you know nothing about the circumstances of his death, or about the statistics about police brutality, and how the African American community gets a disproportionate amount of its brunt?
You know, I'm going to have a cup of coffee now, chocolate coffee, and then we're going to talk about Stoicism. And Stoicism has a place in all of this.
Go, have your cup of coffee and enjoy every drop of it. And then we'll hear your take on Stoicism. One thing that I'm wondering if you'll talk about is an idea that is very key in Stoicism, which is referred to as Cosmopolitanism. It's basically the idea that all people, all human beings are part of the same whole, part of the same community. The Emperor Marcus Aurelius put it very eloquently in the opening passage of the second book of his Meditations, which I'll quote here from the translation by George Long. Begin the morning by saying to thyself, I shall meet with the busybody, the ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful, envious, unsocial. All these things happen to them by reason of their ignorance of what is good and evil. But I, who have seen the nature of the good that it is beautiful, and of the bad that it is ugly, and the nature of him who does wrong that it is akin to me, not only of the same blood or seed, but that it participates in the same intelligence and the same portion of divinity. I can neither be injured by any of them, for no one can fix on me what is ugly, nor can I be angry with my kinsman, nor hate him. For we are made for cooperation, like feet, like hands, like eyelids, like the rows of the upper and lower teeth. To act against one another, then, is contrary to nature, and it is acting against one another to be vexed and to turn away. So when you discuss the place of Stoicism in all this, I expect that you'll give some mention of the importance of trying to understand the reason that motivates people to be out on the street protesting, and at least some mention about your obligation as a human being to not turn your back on them.
And Stoicism has helped me a lot, and it's helping me every day. I am a very emotional person, so I know I can't let myself be ruled by my emotions. So Stoicism is basically about keeping your emotions out of it, and using sense and reason.
Wow. You really don't have a clue what Stoicism is, now do you? Yes, it is about using sense and reason, but it is by no means about shutting your emotion out. It is about using sense and reason to properly process and work through your emotions, which you are not doing if you are shutting your emotions out.
And there is something called stoic calmness, I guess you could say. Can you imagine if they taught that in school as a good thing? I know that the American Psychological Association or something like that, they actually termed Stoicism as something, I think it was they toxic and harmful.
And now it is time for another installment of Fallacy Exposed. And your fallacy is the ambiguity fallacy. That is when you use a word or phrase that has multiple possible meanings in an argument, and during the course of the argument you swizzle between one meaning and another so as to make an argument that you couldn't make if you had faithfully stuck to either definition throughout the argument. The Merriam-Webster dictionary defines Stoicism in two possible ways. The first definition, which, by the way, must be capitalized in order to be spelled correctly, is the philosophy of the Stoics. And The second definition, which is the only definition that can properly be spelled without a capital S, is indifference to pleasure or pain. While some of the Stoic advice that you give does seem to be dreadfully influenced by the second of these two definitions, and while the few videos of yours that you've made in the past, as well as this video, I haven't been able to find any reference to any specific Stoic philosopher so as to definitively show that you mean the first of these two definitions, you do seem to get just enough right about Stoic philosophy for me to strongly suspect that it is indeed the first definition, that is, Stoicism with a capital S, that you are meaning to refer to when you promote Stoicism. However, when I look at the articles on the American Psychological Association website, in which they refer to Stoicism as harmful, they are consistently spelling it with a lowercase s, which is a pointer to the second definition listed in the dictionary, not to the first one. As a matter of fact, from what I recall, cognitive behavioral therapy, which the American Psychological Association definitely considers to be a legitimate form of therapy, has Stoic philosophy as part of its foundation. For that matter, the history of modern Stoic philosophy and the history of cognitive behavioral therapy are very much intertwined with one another. So the notion that the American Psychological Association considers Stoic philosophy to be harmful or toxic is complete nonsense that is bolstered by the fallacy of ambiguity.
Can you imagine if the young people today, they had actually been taught Stoicism? Do you think they would have been out in the streets screaming and burning down buildings and all of that? I don't think so.
Just one point of information, by the way. There's plenty of evidence now that the actual acts of looting and violence are not even instigated by people who are with the protests. But hey, don't let facts get in the way of your conspiracy theories. But anyways, if your question is, would they be out protesting if they were taught Stoicism? Well, the answer is, if they believe that going out to protest is their civic duty, then yes, they indeed would be out protesting. And if they are properly applying cosmopolitanism, which, as I previously explained, is something that they should be doing if they identify as being Stoic, then I can't imagine any way that they could come across an overly aggressive police force that tends to disproportionately target a racial minority and not see that as something that it is definitely their civic duty to protest.
Whenever I get upset by the behavior of others, I try to think or ask myself, do you have the right, I ask myself, to view these people as sensible people?
No, it is not about whether or not you have the right to expect another person to be reasonable. It is about whether or not it is reasonable for you to expect another person to behave in a particular way that you prefer. And yes, sometimes when someone is behaving in a way contrary to how you would prefer they behave, it could in fact be all about them not behaving in a rational manner. However, that is not the only possible reason. It could be that they have a perfectly legitimate and reasonable cause for behaving the way they do that just doesn't align with what you would prefer they be doing. But anyways, the crucial issue must not be whether or not you have the right to expect that they be reasonable beings, but whether or not it is reasonable for you to expect that they will act a certain way, whatever certain way. Because if your calm depends on the conclusion that somebody else is being unreasonable, then what you are practicing is not Stoicism. It is Schadenfreude.
They are not governed by their sense and reason, but by their emotions. And that can be a good thing, like love. Love is a positive emotion, right? You have love for your children and for your spouse and for nature.
And what if the one you love is a parent, a child, a sibling, a spouse, a neighbor, or even a fellow human being who, because of the color of their skin, the police are always watching them more closely, more likely to harass them, and are at much greater risk of dying in one of the aggressive power trips of the police? Surely you can appreciate that taking to the streets and demanding that a stop be put to this is a very, very loving thing to do. Surely you can appreciate that.
But what we're seeing now is hate. It's not positive. It's very destructive.
Unbelievable. If this is not a example of what I'm referring to by weaponized stoicism, then I have no clue what is. But maybe your misunderstanding of Stoicism is from a genuine place and is not from a place of trying to weaponize it against marginalized groups. Maybe just in general, your understanding of Stoic philosophy is too much based on trying to see unreasonability in the behaviors of others.
And I know it's easy for me to say because I'm here in a rural area in Norway, so it's not so easy to just have the same calmness if you're in one of those cities where they are rioting, of course.
Nope, never mind. Your problem is only with people who are protesting social injustice. People who are inconvenienced by protests of social injustices that should have been fixed long ago, those people you seem to have plenty of empathy for. Of course, the last possible charitable assumption I could make about what passes with you as Stoicism is that maybe for you the distinguishing difference is the actual looting and the destruction of property, and maybe the actual physical acts are what does it for you. However, if that were the case, one would have expected that there would be at least one mention of the damn aggressive policing behavior that is going on in the United States. But was there? No. Not one mention in your whole video. You may call yourself a Stoic, but you have no clue what Stoicism is all about. You. Anyways, enough of that. I hope that you appreciated this video. Please hit the thumbs up button and leave a comment in the comments area below. Make sure that you are subscribed to this channel and that the bell icon is active so as to increase the probability that you receive notifications when I add new videos to this channel in the future. Share this video with your friends on social media as well as by any other means. And until next time, see ya!